Demi Lovato has been a longtime celebrity proponent of recovery. She's also gone through a very recent, very public relapse. And this past week, she came out as being California sober. I have actually tried being California sober. I'm going to share my experience with that.
I'm JT. I'm in my mid-30s, have a 10-year media career, and nearly a decade of sobriety. So how did another middle-class kid turn into a blackout drunk and a heroin junkie? More importantly, how did it change, and where do we go from here? This is my story.
Okay, so before I get started here, I'm going to run a disclaimer. I think I've said this before. I can't say this enough times. My way of sobriety and recovery is not the only way. I do not believe there's only one way to do it. I have seen other people do it in different ways, so I do not think that the way I do it is the only way to do it. Some people do feel that way, and I have a problem with those people, okay? They're out there. But I think however you can be happy, however you can deal with those demons and get your life in the order that you feel comfortable with, I'm all about it. So that's a very important disclaimer. I also want to say I'm a big fan of Demi Lovato. I think she's incredibly talented. I think she's beautiful. I had a huge celeb crush on her. And by the way, I've supported her music when I was first a music director about, 6-7 years ago. As a music director, I played her song Cool for the Summer more than any other hot AC station in the country. So I have no problems with Demi Lovato personally or professionally. In fact, I'm a big fan of a lot of her stuff. But so this past week, she has a documentary that's come out, and her trials and tribulations with addiction have been well documented. She has an personal experience with her past, being a child star, going through bullying, having eating disorders that I could never imagine. I have not had to deal with any sort of personal experience on that scale. This is never an apples to apples comparison. It's always apples to oranges, no matter who we're talking about or what addictions we're talking about. Some people say addictions are all the same. For me, I know my substances ultimately end up being all the same when it comes to my addiction, but someone else's addiction is not the same as mine. So I just think it's very important to go over a few of those things before I get into this. I've never really publicly reacted to anyone's sobriety in the celebrity world. I had a bit to share about Dax Shepard's public relapse. That was more just a response. This is a little bit different. So Demi was in a lot of publications this week because of her YouTube documentary coming out. And she was on Joe Rogan's show, which is the biggest internet show, the biggest non-broadcast or cable interview show on the face of the planet. It's bigger than most of those. So I'm going to dig into a few of the things she said. The big headline was she said that she is now California sober, which to her means, I'd never heard that term before, but to her means she's basically sober while also smoking marijuana. So there's a whole can of worms for the recovery community on that. And I know some people have responded. I am not going to jump on anyone who's been mean about it online. I'm certainly not going to jump on her. I'm just going to share my experience, because when I was coming up through recovery, we called this the marijuana maintenance program. And I actually tried this. So when I was first trying to get sober, one of my first attempts, it wasn't a real attempt at sobriety. It was in college. I'd had one of my many run-ins where my parents had a come to Jesus meeting with me. And one of the deals was for me to go back to college. I think this was my junior year of college. For me to go back for second semester, I had to agree to not drink, and I was going to go to meetings, and I was going to try Alcoholics Anonymous and try sober living. And I thought I did that. I did go to meetings. I did not drink alcohol, but I thought I could also do marijuana and hallucinogenics. I thought that was okay. Now, obviously, I didn't go to enough meetings. I didn't dig in. I didn't work the steps because I would have figured out for me that I cannot be sober from alcohol and still use marijuana and other drugs and have that fulfillment and get that peace and contentment. It just doesn't work for me. What ended up happening was I ended up drinking again. I wasn't sober from alcohol even for that long. It was about 3, maybe 5 months. Doesn't really matter because what happened? Well, what always happened for me happened, which is when I finally thought I could have a couple drinks again, it was not very long at all. I mean, it was within maybe less than a month of starting to dabble and have a few drinks again that I'd been pulled over by the cops and was really close to going to jail for drinking and driving. I mean, that's how fast it happened for me. So I'm not directly equating it, and there's a whole another side of this, which is this was my experience over 10 years ago. Today, our society is in a completely different place with marijuana. And as I've said before, I believe in marijuana medicinally, not 100% of how it's used medicinally, but I do believe it has medicinal uses and people get a lot of benefit out of it. And I'm not here to judge marijuana. I've said before that marijuana was a gateway drug for me. But my experience with it and my relationship to it now, because I do have those thoughts. I mean, when we live in a society where marijuana every day is less and less stigmatized as a drug, even though federally it's still Schedule 1, probably shouldn't be, but it's less stigmatized because so many states it's becoming legal. The federal crackdowns are becoming less and less, and it's just part of life more and more. More people are open about talking about smoking marijuana. I do, in this ever-increasing world of marijuana being socially acceptable, I do have thoughts from time to time, and I know some of my friends in recovery can relate to this. Thoughts every once in a while going, hey, maybe I could go back to the marijuana maintenance program. Those thoughts don't last very long for me. As I've said before, I'm very lucky to have a good relationship with my step one, so to speak, that I know I can't drink or use again. That's my higher power talking to me saying, no, you can't do that. Because for me, here's why. When I use marijuana, it alters my thinking and it alters my state of mind in a way that may not necessarily have direct negative effects in the moment, but over time, it affects my way of life. And maybe, you know what? Maybe someone would say, well, JT, you really probably could use some time vegging out and not thinking about reality too much. Maybe you take yourself a little less seriously and be a little more fun to hang out with. Maybe that's the case. But as I've said before, I have this house of cards constructed to where I know I can have a successful, joyful, contentful life. And part of that is not altering my state of being. And there's all these arguments, right? Well, you overuse food sometimes, and that can alter your state of mind. I use nicotine. That can alter your state of mind. Just the gum. I haven't had any tobacco in almost as long as sobriety, so just the gum. But I'm working on that. That's a video for another time. Anywho, for me, marijuana alters my brain in a way that affects me being able to take proper inventory of my life, of my day, of what's been behind me, of what's in front of me, of how I'm going to achieve these goals that I have to have this contentful, peaceful life. And so I can't do it. I can't do the marijuana maintenance program. I can't do California sober. And I will also say this. While I contend that my way is not the only way, and I applaud anyone who can achieve sobriety or achieve their version of recovery through any means possible, I have also never seen it work for anyone, okay? So I know people who have different ways of achieving sobriety. Like I have another friend who's in the media business who does not go to meetings and all he does is meditate. And that's not all he does, but meditation, mindfulness, those are his main ways of staying sober off of alcohol. That is different than using drugs or trying moderation. To be honest, it really gets down to a distinction of, can moderation and sobriety live together? I don't think they can. They can't for me. I haven't known anyone who can use in moderation, and they may have a successful career. Maybe they even have a successful home life. But ultimately, what I've heard from those people who have tried that is that they're still missing something in their life. So that's just my experience. I wish Demi all the best, and I hope this works out for her. And again, California, living in California, you might have a completely different worldview on this whole thing. And our sober community in California may have a different view on this thing. I don't know. I'm not there. But I did want to touch on a couple other things outside of the California sober deal. These are quotes from what she said on Joe Rogan's show. One of her quotes was, "It's not realistic for me to look at the rest of my life and think that I'm not going to ingest some substance." I thought this was really interesting for Demi to say, because Demi says she had some long-term sobriety, like 6 years of sobriety, which is awesome, back in her past. That is the type of quote that I usually hear people who have not yet had long-term sobriety say. That's a common fear of people. I'll say that's a common fear. That was a fear of mine. When I was first thinking, could I get sober? I was thinking down the road, I'm not going to have a drink at my best friend's wedding in 10 years, whenever that happens. I'm not going to have a drink at my wedding. Well, guess what? I still haven't had a wedding. And my best friends that have gotten married, I've been in their weddings, and I didn't have a drink. And it was a great time. And I have fantastic memories from them. So I did think that was interesting. Again, it goes back to, I don't know if you can have the distinction of moderation and sobriety. I think there's going to be a line there when you're saying things like, I don't know if I can go the rest of my life and not ingest something. And then we go into all the qualifications of what's something, right? Is nicotine something? Is food something? It's just a whole can of worms. But I thought that was interesting, because to me, that's usually something I hear or I recognize in myself, something that I thought and said before I had long-term sobriety. I don't often hear people who've had long-term sobriety in the past or successful long-term sobriety saying that they don't know if they can look into the future and see them not ingesting something. Because for me, it's not about, now that I've got some sobriety and I've lived in it, it's not about what's going to happen 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. It's all about today. It's all about this moment right now. It's all about what's directly in front of me. I can't worry about my personal habits, addictions, 10, 20 years down the road. What good is that going to do me today? So I found that fascinating. The other quote she had from Rogan, talking about total abstinence from drugs and alcohol, she said, "This kind of ideal of perfection I don't subscribe with, because perfection has never worked for me before." And when I heard her say that, I felt sad, because that's how I felt, again, before I had long-term good experience with sobriety. That's how I felt that. And again, she's been in the public eye. Like, she may have people on the internet or other celebrities or people that carry a lot of weight talking down to her because, no, you have to do it exactly this way. And there are a lot of people in sobriety, mostly newly in sobriety, that get the pink cloud, where they get really high and mighty on sobriety and they like to tell people, no, you need to do it exactly this way. Those people are garbage. Don't listen to them. They make sobriety harder for more people. And it's already hard enough. Our success rate isn't exactly fantastic. Our percentages aren't very good, okay? So those people I don't have any time of day for. So I don't know if she's had to deal with a lot of that. But for me, I've never felt the pressure of perfection. I've never felt that from anyone in the rooms, from any of my close friends in sobriety. Never, ever, ever has perfection ever been part of it. That was a fear I had before I got sober and before I really got into it. And so I'm not questioning Demi. I really believe that she's really worked the steps and really gotten into it and has had real long-term sobriety, and that this is her conscious, very measured choice. But perfection is not something I subscribe to either. I hope you know from watching this that like failure is my whole thing. Failure is how I move through life. Failing, trying things, failing, and then admitting my failures is how I stay sober. It's never had anything to do with perfection. I'm never going to be perfect. I'm never going to have a perfect day. And I'm always challenging myself to try and have a more perfect day or have less failures, but I'm always going to have failures. And nobody in my circle of sobriety, my family, my job, nobody expects perfection from me. And I couldn't imagine going through life. And, it may be because she's in that highly, highly, highly leveraged and pressured life of being a celebrity and having been in that business from a young age, and that pressure of perfection. That's a totally different thing that I can't pretend to understand. But as far as sobriety goes, and my experience with recovery, never has the pressure of perfection been part of my experience. So anyways, that's just my response. I wish Demi the best. I think she's awesome. I just wanted you to hear from me as someone who's tried this California sober thing and who has some thoughts on the way she seems to be processing it. I wanted you to hear that from my perspective. All right, let's get the mail. First, we're going to hear from Illy Scorpio. Illy Scorpio says on Instagram, congrats on 9 years. I'm 4 months sober after a long relapse. Keep spreading hope and positivity. Thank you so much, Illy. I'm so glad that you have your 4 months after a relapse. The reason I wanted to share your comment is because I don't know if people understand, it's such a huge deal to be able to get back on that horse after relapse. I don't wish relapse on anyone, but the reality is I am in the minority that I haven't relapsed in 9 years. Most people do relapse, and it is very, very, very hard to relapse, especially after long-term sobriety, to then come back. I mean, the guilt and shame that comes with it. I know people who had decades of sobriety and had built up huge careers and beautiful families, and they relapse and didn't come back in for a decade and ruined all those things that they had built up during their sobriety. And it just breaks your heart to hear those stories, but I've heard enough of them to where I don't want to go there. And that's not to say I won't. Anything could happen. But I wanted to commend Illy for not only getting back in there, but being able to admit it after only 4 months back, because gosh, is it hard to do. I've never been in that scenario personally, but I've known a lot of people who have struggled to come back after relapse. And even when they do, it is very, very difficult. Thank you, Illy. Next, we are going to go to Leah Downs. Leah was commenting on my body image issues video, and this is from Facebook, and Leah says, when I feel quote-unquote disgusted with myself, I have found it helpful to make myself get up, fix my hair cute, do my makeup, and put on one of my corsets and take a few photos for myself. It really boosts my self-esteem and makes me say, damn, you look good, girl. Mom bod has been my biggest struggle with how I feel. No matter how hard I work, it's just there. Well, I certainly do not know what mom bod is like. I haven't had to go through that. I know my sister has processed so many of these emotions from having had a baby and gone through all that. So Leah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's fantastic advice. That was the comment from Facebook that I pinpointed the most, because I really identify with that idea of, fixing yourself up. I don't think there's anything wrong with looking good for yourself, not for someone else. It's for me. I had a friend in high school who always used to say, we always used to give him crap because he was always dressed up no matter where we were going. He said, hey, you never know who you're going to meet. And I was like, man, I hated to hear it at the time, but I was like, that's great advice. And I've kind of tried to live that way. Like during COVID, I like joke to myself all the time because I'm up in the studio at work and I barely see anyone the whole time I'm there, but every day I get dressed up and I do my hair and all that stuff. And I'm like, why do I even bother? Like, why don't I just wear gym shorts to work every day? It's because it helps me get in that right mindset for me, and feeling good about yourself is important. And I will never understand why people would not want someone to have aesthetic joy about themselves. And it can come in all different sorts of ways. But to say that how we look should not be part of our self-esteem, it can come in different shapes and sizes. But I think it's very important for you to feel good about how you look. And there's a lot of different ways to get there. And sometimes there's a lot of things that are getting in the way of us getting there. But however you achieve that, I'm all for it. And for me, it's been very important too. So Leah, thank you so much for your comment. I really connected with it. Please feel free to reach out, DM on any of the following, or leave a comment. You can leave a comment here on the video as well. I would love to start a dialogue. I would love to share your comment here as well. We'll see you next time. Hey family, if you like what we're doing here and you want to see more, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Share it with someone who you think might benefit from watching this, and feel free to comment below. Love.